Rain lashed against the carriage windows. Thunder roared, a symphony of nature's fury. Inside, Evelyn huddled deeper into her cloak, her heart pounding in sync with the storm. Blackwood Manor, her destination, had always been shrouded in whispers. Now, it awaited her, a looming silhouette against the tempestuous sky. The carriage lurched to a halt, the driver struggling against the wind to open the door. Evelyn stepped out into the maelstrom, her breath snatched away by the sheer force of the gale. Lightning illuminated the manor, its Gothic facade resembling a grimacing skull, the windows like empty eyes staring back at her. A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation. A lone figure stood in the grand entryway holding a lantern aloft. Its light flickered against the driving rain, casting dancing shadows that stretched out like beckoning fingers. With a deep breath, Evelyn gathered her courage and moved towards the waiting figure, the storm mirroring the turmoil within her own heart. The manor's interior was a stark contrast to the raging storm outside. A fire blazed in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the opulent yet somewhat faded furnishings. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and old books, a comforting aroma that did little to dispel the underlying sense of unease that permeated the very walls. Evelyn's gaze swept over the portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. Their eyes seemed to follow her every move, their silence speaking volumes. A grandfather clock ticked ominously in the corner, its rhythmic cadence a constant reminder of the passage of time and the secrets held within the manor's depths. Her aunt, Lady Blackwood, greeted her with a warm embrace. Her eyes, though kind, held a hint of sadness. Evelyn had only met her aunt once before, a distant figure shrouded in mystery. Now, she was to be her guardian, her only solace in a world that seemed to be crumbling around her. As Evelyn settled into her room, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind against the window panes, sent shivers down her spine. Blackwood Manor was more than just a house, it was a living entity, pulsating with untold stories and guarded secrets. Dinner was a grand affair, held in a dining hall that seemed to stretch on forever. The long mahogany table was laden with silver and crystal, the flickering candlelight reflecting off the polished surfaces. Evelyn, seated amongst a dozen or so guests, felt a wave of apprehension wash over her. There was an air of forced gaiety amongst the guests, their laughter a touch too loud, their smiles a touch too wide. Evelyn found herself studying their faces, searching for any hint of genuineness behind their carefully constructed facades. Her gaze fell upon the man seated across from her. His name was Julian. Lady Blackwood had introduced him earlier, but little else. He was strikingly handsome, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Unlike the others, there was a quiet intensity about him, an aura of mystery that both intrigued and unnerved her. As the evening progressed, Evelyn found herself drawn to Julian's enigmatic presence. His words were few, but every syllable was laced with a quiet intelligence that hinted at a depth rarely found. He listened intently as she spoke, his gaze never wavering, making her feel like she was the only person in the room. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself seeking out Julian's company. They would steal moments together, amidst the opulent yet strangely suffocating atmosphere of Blackwood Manor. They walked in the gardens, the silence between them filled with unspoken words and a growing sense of understanding. One afternoon, while exploring the manor's vast library, they stumbled upon a hidden alcove. Dust-covered books lined the shelves, their leather bindings cracked with age. A sense of forgotten history hung heavy in the air, a silent testament to lives lived and secrets kept. As they reached for the same book, their fingers brushed. Evelyn looked up at Julian, her breath catching in her throat. His eyes, usually so guarded, softened. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, just as quickly, the moment was gone. Their interactions were a delicate dance, a careful exploration of boundaries. Evelyn was drawn to Julian's enigmatic nature, his past as much a mystery as the manor itself. and Julian, she sensed, saw something in her, a kindred spirit amidst the superficiality that surrounded them. As the days turned into nights, the storm outside raged on, mirroring the turmoil brewing within the manor's walls. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the window panes and sending shivers down Evelyn's spine. One evening, as the guests gathered in the drawing room, the lights flickered and died, plunging the manor into darkness. Screams pierced the air, followed by a cacophony of panicked whispers. The storm seemed to intensify, its fury echoing the fear that gripped the room. Evelyn, her heart pounding in her chest, stumbled through the darkness, her hand reaching out for something, anything, to steady her. Suddenly she felt a hand close around hers, strong and reassuring. "Don't be afraid," a voice whispered, the familiarity of it calming her racing heart. It was Julian. He led her through the labyrinthine corridors, his presence a beacon in the overwhelming darkness. As they made their way towards the kitchen, where candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The power outage, the heightened emotions, it all felt orchestrated. In the dimly lit kitchen, amidst the chaos of the other guests, Evelyn and Julian found a moment of respite. They worked together, lighting candles and fetching blankets, their movements in sync, their unspoken connection deepening. As Evelyn watched Julian, his face illuminated by the flickering candlelight, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for his presence. He was her anchor in the storm, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the fear that threatened to consume her. "There's something about the dark, isn't there?" Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. "It has a way of stripping away pretense, revealing our true selves." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Evelyn, her heart pounding, could only nod, her own thoughts mirroring his. In the shared vulnerability of that moment, a new level of intimacy blossomed between them. They were no longer strangers, brought together by circumstance. They were two souls, seeking solace in each other's company, their connection forged in the crucible of fear and uncertainty. As the storm raged on, keeping the guests confined within the manor's walls, Evelyn learned that Julian had been invited to Blackwood Manor for reasons similar to her own. He too had a past shrouded in mystery, a connection to the manor that ran deeper than he cared to admit. Late one night as they sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on their faces, Julian finally confided in Evelyn. He spoke of a family secret, a betrayal that had shattered his world and led him to Blackwood Manor. His voice was low, filled with a pain that resonated deep within Evelyn's soul. She listened intently, her heart aching for him. As he spoke, she realized that Julian's guarded exterior was not a sign of coldness, but rather a shield, protecting a heart that had been broken. In that moment of shared vulnerability, their bond deepened, their connection transcending the boundaries of mere acquaintance. Evelyn, in turn, found herself sharing her own fears and insecurities with Julian. She spoke of her parents' untimely death, her own sense of displacement in the world. With each shared secret, each whispered confidence, the wall between them crumbled a little more, revealing the raw, vulnerable souls beneath. The storm, as if mirroring the emotional catharsis within the manor, finally began to subside. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the rain-soaked grounds, Evelyn and Julian found themselves standing on the balcony, overlooking the gardens. "It's beautiful," Evelyn whispered, her voice filled with awe. The storm had washed away the oppressive atmosphere, leaving behind a sense of renewal, of hope. She turned to Julian, her heart filled with a newfound lightness. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian looked at her, his blue eyes filled with understanding. He didn't need to ask her what she was thanking him for. He knew. They had faced their fears together, their bond forged in the crucible of the storm. As they stood there side by side, the silence between them was no longer filled with unspoken words, but with a shared understanding that transcended language. They had found solace in each other's company, a connection that ran deeper than either of them could have imagined. With the storm past and the guests preparing to depart, Blackwood Manor seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Evelyn, packing her belongings, couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving a part of herself behind. As she stood at the grand entrance waiting for her carriage, she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see Julian standing before her, his blue eyes filled with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. "I don't know when I'll see you again," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "But I won't forget you, Evelyn." He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. "And I hope," he continued, his gaze holding hers, "that you won't forget me." Evelyn, her heart pounding in her chest, could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. As she stepped into the waiting carriage, she couldn't help but look back at Julian, his silhouette framed in the doorway. And as the carriage pulled away, she allowed herself a small glimmer of hope, a flicker of possibility that their paths would cross again. For in the darkness of Blackwood Manor, amidst the storm and the secrets, they had found something rare and precious, a connection that transcended time and circumstance.